All right, well, let's get moving then. Okay, so if you've just joined us, welcome. This is the automation webinar for ClickUp. We're about to get kicked off. We do have a question. Okay, having to leave early. Will you receive a copy of this? Yes, this webinar will be recorded. It will be emailed to you, and it'll also be available on the website, clickup.com/webinar. Okay. Okay, another good question. What is the difference between this webinar and the first one about automation? Good question. This one is updated. There's a few new features. And we're going to be covering a little bit extra things, a little bit different use cases. Yeah, so if you have seen the first one, that's great. There'll be some extra stuff in this one. If you haven't seen the first one, then this one will be perfect. It'll give you the whole overview. Okay. So if you're not used to Zoom, this is what your Zoom screen will look a little bit like. Down the bottom here, you have chat and QA. If you would like to ask us a question, we have a whole team of my wonderful customer support people online. Do please put those questions in Q&A and they'll answer them from there. You can use chat, but it won't be monitored. It's just for a kind of conversation back and forth. Okay, so again, today's webinar is being recorded. It will be automatically emailed to you after the webinar. It'll also be available at clickup.com/webinar. Okay, so this is me. Who am I? So the reason I'm giving this webinar, why I'm talking to you today, so my history is as a trainer, product manager, and senior product expert at ClickUp. I've been doing this stuff for a little while, and my specialty is in converting the feature list of ClickUp into a actual functional, usable kind of day-to-day way of using ClickUp, if that makes sense. So I'm now an independent consultant. This is what I kind of do day in, day out. There's a contact there, and it'll also be on the screen again at the end. Okay, our agenda for today. So we're going to be going over, first of all, an overview with the basics and examples. Then we're going to go into dynamic data and data mapping, which is a new feature. We're going to talk about the limitations of ClickUp automation and what to do to sometimes get around those limitations. We're going to look at automation integrations. So that's when automation within ClickUp is starting to link to other softwares outside of ClickUp. Automation chains and diverging paths. That's not actually a feature. That's just a clever way of using various things that can allow you to do much more with automations than you'd normally be able to. Then some more tips and tricks, some sneak peek into some future features, and then we'll jump into questions. Okay, so first of all, what is automation? So automation in ClickUp is I call it an if this then that style, if you've heard of that before. So basically a trigger needs to happen. When a trigger happens, ClickUp then kind of takes that in and takes one or several other actions. So the reason you'd use that, typically two main reasons. The first is to shape workflows. Say, for example, when a task reaches stage 3, a checklist should be added. Now, if you rely on people to do that, it's quite possible that someone will forget. And if they forget to add the checklist, they're definitely going to forget to do the checklist, and then work ends up not being done. If you do it with automation, then you know that it's always going to happen like clockwork, and it keeps the workflow well shaped and kind of always running. The second one, obviously, is remove manual work. So if you have a fairly simple repetitive task that needs to happen over and over again, instead of having people spend time and waste time doing that, you can simply have it be done automatically. Okay, so for today, I'm going to use an example use case of sales. I'll use sales just because it's quite a long workflow. It's fairly clear, so we have lots of places we can automate it. So these are the examples I'm going to show you initially. So when a new task is created, we'll assign it to people and also add watchers, and then we'll set a custom field. So 2 actions. Then when the status is changed, what we'll do is we'll do an if. So we'll check if the deal size is greater than 30,000. And if so, add a tag and assign it to a senior salesperson. So two actions there as well. Then if the status is changed to invoice, we'll assign it to the finance staff. And if it's lost or cold, which again is a status, we'll just archive it. And finally, if it's all going to plan, and it's in negotiation status, what we'll do is we'll create a subtask for writing to contract. Okay, so let's jump into ClickUp. So this is my little sales space. Okay, so let's jump into those examples. Actually, before we go into those examples, let's kind of do the overview. That's right. So what might be useful is to kind of also describe the difference between ClickUp automation and external automation. But I'll jump into that in a second. If you're in ClickUp in any space, here I'm on a list, you can see I have the automation button here on the space or anywhere else. It's up the top here. It is visible when you're clicked on a list view. So if I apply an automation at the space level, that automation will trigger off any task in that whole space. If I do it on a list level, obviously it'll only trigger on tasks in that list. So if I click on this automation button, I can see my active automations. I can add a new one. And there's also two little quick options that just allows you to set up an automation for assigning tasks to people. So any new task in this list will be assigned to this assignee and also have these watchers added. So really quick. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit add automation to bring up the main window. Okay. So the anatomy of an automation in ClickUp is this is the action, sorry, the trigger. It's a better word for that, because this is then the action. And you can have multiple actions here. Now there's one third component, and that's down here, and that's a condition. So this is the if statement. So a trigger happens. So for example, the status is changed, and then we're going to do a couple of actions. But if the status is, if this condition is not met, so let's say, priority is any of urgent. So yeah, so if the priority is not urgent, then it will not continue. So even though this trigger happened, if this condition isn't true, it won't do the actions. So that's conditions. For a lot of simple automations, you won't use conditions. It's just trigger and then action. Okay, now there's a difference between ClickUp automation and automation you may have seen before, such as Zapier or Integromat. I'm going to refer to them as internal being ClickUp automation, and external being Zapier, Integromat, APIs, all of that. The key thing is that in ClickUp, there is not a search. So when you trigger something, the action needs to happen in a known location. The known location can be two things. It can be the task that it triggered on, or it can be a location that you specifically set. And that's often in the case of creating new things. You can create a new task in a specific location that you set. Cool. So in this webinar, we're just going to cover internal automation. So this ClickUp automation. Okay. Now, in our pop-up here, we have three tabs. Browse is for creating new automations. Manage is to see your existing automations. Currently, we don't have any. And usage is to see how much of your automation quota you've used up. So each plan will have a different quota. For a business plan, it's 10,000 per month. And those are actions. So if you do 2 actions in automation, that will use up 2 each time it runs. I think I forget off the top of my head what the limits are. I think for free plan, it's just 10 to try it out. Unlimited, I think it's around 1,000. Business is 10,000. I think enterprise is up around 100,000. And you can buy extra if you want. Cool. Okay. In our browse option here, you have all these categories. And these are kind of options for pre-made automations. So if you want to do something with statuses, you can look through and pick the one that suits you. So perhaps when the status changes, then archive task, that will be useful later on. And that will kind of set it up for you. Or you can always just do add custom automation and pick it yourself. I quite like to use this because I'm quite familiar with the different things, but it can be great to look through here as like a catalog of options. Be aware this doesn't have all the options because there are a very high number. Okay, so let's set up some examples. So on our sales list here, what we want to do is we want to add assignees and watchers when we have a new task. So a new task coming in here means it's a new prospect. someone that is interested in our services. Maybe they've reached out on our website. We've gotten their contact details. So we can very simply come to the automation button here and use these two quick ones. So we'll add an assignee. So any new lead, we're going to assign it to Aaron. We also want to add Shane and Isaac as watchers because they're interested in these tasks, but Aaron will be the one that has the responsibility for taking the first action. So let's try a new task here. Let's just call it client 1. Cool, and immediately we can see that Aaron has been assigned. If we open this up, we can see we have watchers for Isaac and Shane as well. Now, I'm also a watcher because I created it. Aaron's also a watcher because he's assigned to it. Brilliant. So that's our first automation there. Let's have a look at the one again. Next one is status changed. So when the status changes, we want to check. Actually, no, sorry, I missed one. We're also going to set a custom field. So let's go into our automations again. And here we'll go into active automations to see our existing ones. We have one for always assigning the task. We have one for always watching tasks. Now those are shortcuts, so they're not actually editable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete them and just set them up manually to show you what the editor looks like. So if we go into Browse and Add Custom Automation, so our trigger is when a new task is created. Task created. And there's no extra options for that, very simple. Then we want to have our first action of change assignees. And now we can just add Aaron here. There isn't a, whoopsie daisy. I just clicked outside the pop-up there, so it closed out of it. Okay, change assignees, we'll assign to Aaron. There is an advanced option, and that kind of shows you, do you want to add someone, remove someone? Reassign means remove everyone and then add the person, and remove all assignees if you wanted to go back to unassigned. Anyway, all we want to do is add Aaron as the assignee. Then we'll add a second action, which will be for watchers. So here, change watchers. Same thing, we don't want to remove anyone, so we'll just add Isaac and Shane. And then we'll add a third action, which was to change that custom field value. So here, down at the bottom, we have set custom field. We can choose which field we're going to use. I think I was going to use, let's use job. Okay, so let's say the job is, so perhaps the tasks when they come in, they're all coming in from the website and people are looking for a particular type of service. So we'll set the value as job A and create. So now we have all of those on that one automation. The number of automations you have, like before we had 2, now we have 1, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is how many actions you take, which is the same, except we now have the extra one for the custom field. So let's create a new task. We'll say client 2. And we'll give it a second. Sometimes, if you're not seeing it happen initially, either A, I've set something up wrong, or B, it's just not pulling in the new data, so I'll go to refresh. The same thing as if you had navigated to somewhere else and come back, it would have refreshed the data as well. So we can see here, assigned, custom field, and watchers. Brilliant. Okay. Our next one is when the status changes. If the deal is over a certain value, we want to take some actions. So here we've got a deal size custom field. And so we'll set up another automation. Go to the automation button here, add automation. Now, status change is the correct trigger. And we're actually doing it on any status change from anything to anything. We don't care. Just every time the status is changed, check. And the way we're going to check is with a condition. So we're going to add a condition. So we'll say custom field, and we'll select our field here. We want to go deal size, and we'll go is greater than. Is greater than. There we go. And we want to do 30,000. Okay, deal size is greater than 30,000. Okay, if that is true, we want to take 2 actions. So the first is add a tag. So we're going to change tags, add tag. Let's create a new one. Let's just call it big deal. Okay, mental note, you can't add tags in the automation editor. So let's add that tag on the actual list first. So big deal. Fantastic, we now have that. And now we can create our automation. So status change from any to any, custom field is greater than, and we'll say deal size 30,000. Fantastic. Change tags, add a tag, big deal. And the second action is we want to assign it to our senior salesperson. So change assignee to Ivan. Fantastic, create. Now, that will only trigger on that status change. So if I put in, say, 40,000 here, it's not going to trigger the automation because the trigger event, status change, hasn't happened. Now, we could set up a different automation with the custom field being the trigger, but we don't have greater than options here. It'd just be like to a specific number, so that doesn't work well. Better to have it as a condition, and then anytime that the value changes, like say we set up a pitch meeting for this one, we can now see it's 40,000 and the status has changed. If we open it up, we can now see it's also assigned to Ivan. Now we could have also added, remove Aaron to our automation, but we didn't do that. And we have our big deal tag there. Okay, awesome. So that's our example number 2. Example number 3. So if this goes well and we move this to invoicing, what we want to have happen is we want to assign it to the finance team. So we'll add a new automation here. And again, we will go status change, but this time we'll say only to invoice. So it doesn't matter which status it was in before, as long as it's going to invoice. Then we'll change the assignee. And now here, what we'll do is we'll go reassign. So instead of having just adding someone and leaving the existing ones on there, no matter who's on there, we'll reassign it. And Willow is our finance person. Cool. Actually, we have several. So we'll go Willow and then also Amy. Okay, so you can only reassign it to one person. Good point. So what we might do is instead of doing that, you could just a couple options here. Okay, the easiest way, you could remove assignees if you know who's going to be assigned. But I'd actually prefer to go remove all assignees, just so it doesn't matter who's assigned. And then second action of assign to Willow and Amy. Okay, that needs to be fixed. But anyway, I think you understand the idea there. We're going to send a note through to the ClickUp team that then it needs to be plural, unless I'm being silly and do not have multiple assignees turned on. So let's check that. So multiple assignees is a ClickUp. If it's off, there we go, that's why. Then it does not allow you to assign multiple people to a task. Okay, before I criticize the team, I should check my own settings. So let's go in and edit that one. So now we should be able to reassign it to the 2 people. There we go. Okay, good note. Fantastic. Okay, so let's move this client 2 to invoice. Okay, and we'll open it up and we'll see that Aaron is gone. Let's just double check that's correctly been assigned to Amy and Willow. Okay, something hasn't gone right there. So let's change that one up a little bit. So I've left this first one on. That's probably not good. So we're also removing all assignees. So let's take that off and just have the one action. And that's a good note. Avoid having simultaneous actions that kind of have any overlap, that kind of like could clash with each other. So let's try that again. We'll move client 2 back to, let's say, prospect, and then to invoice. Cool, and now we have Amy and Willow assigned. Okay, fantastic. So our next one, and also just saw a question pop in. That's a good question. Yes, if you want to edit an existing automation, so I can edit any of these by going into the Manage tab and the pencil icon here, and we can make changes. Okay, our next example is if one of these deals is lost or cold. So for some reason, they weren't interested in buying and they're no longer on our radar. So what we want to do is archive them. So exact same process, automation button, add automation. Here we'll choose, so it's actually status changes as well, because we have a status that I've set up for lost and cold. So either one of those is okay. So from anything to either one of those. Then our action is archive task. It doesn't have any other options. It's just archive it. Done. So setting up automation can be very fast. You do always want to check that it's working the way you expected, but it can be really, really simple as well. So let's change client 2 here to lost. Okay, we'll see it for a second. And then if I refresh this page, it's going to be gone. Now, archive tasks are not permanently gone. We can get back to them. So for example, if I were to change the filter here to archived is archived, we'll see that one is archived. Brilliant. Okay, and our last example to get started is creating a subtask once the contract is in the negotiation stage. So here we have negotiation. So one thing you'll notice if you go into add automations is there is actually no, I'm thinking of another point. I'll get to that later. So we've got this create subtask action here. So we're going to go subtask changes to negotiation, create subtask. Yes, no, this is the point I was thinking of. So as I mentioned before, you have to have a definite location where the action is happening. So in everything we've seen so far, the action has happened on the triggering task. In this case, we're creating something new. It needs to know where it's going. So we actually need to select a task. Okay, and then we'll give it a subtask name. You'll see some options here. We'll get into these later. So if I just kind of put in some basic details here, we'll skip all of this. We'll say we'll start out in prospect, just our open status, no description, priority, due date, start date tags for assignees. That's all fine. Great. If we hit create, that's actually going to work. So what I believe is going to happen there, and let's see if this works the way I'm expecting it to. So if I change this client 1 into negotiation, then what we'll see is it's created a subtask there. So that's actually a really key point. I'll walk you through that again. So on our create a subtask action, I didn't select a parent task, which meant that it defaulted to just the task that it triggered on. Now that's not very clear from the fact that it just says select a task, but really good to note. So if you don't select anyone, it's going to appear on the task that triggered it. If I had selected another task, then no matter what task triggered it, it would always create the subtask on the task I selected, which might be useful if you say have, submit a report, and then you have, I don't know, this is a strange example perhaps, but you have a task for review reports. And so every time you submit a report is complete, it'll add a subtask for that particular report. Potential use case of always having the subtask on one particular other task. Where am I clicking here? Okay, that is our last example. Now, what we're going to jump into next is those blue boxes that you saw, which were dynamic data. So let's actually just pull that example back up again. So dynamic data or data mapping is when you can map information from the trigger to the action. Okay, so it works with certain actions. It works with create subtask. It also works with create a task, and it works with change, start, and due dates. Those 4. It'll work with more in the future, but for now it's those 4. So if we were to go in to fill in the different fields for this subtask, what you'll see is all these purple boxes pop up. This is information that we can pull in from the triggering task to this one. So for example, in the subtask name, we just call it the same as this task's name, the task that triggers it. Or we can give it, the task description of the task that triggers it. And we can even do custom fields. So we could say, task name hyphen deal size of the triggering task, and then maybe even likelihood, which is a drop-down custom field. Okay. Same thing with description. Might just chuck in the whole task description here, and then again, so shift enter or just enter, actually both work. Creates a line here, and so we might say contact, email, contact phone. All the information you want to have in here can be dynamically pulled in from the triggering task. Cool. With due dates and start dates, you also have some options here. You can pull in the due date of the triggering task, the start date of the triggering task, the date created, updated, done, or closed, or you can manually enter, which is not dynamic. So you can choose from any of those. Cool. Let's hit save there. And now let's test that out. So that one was when we're moving it to negotiation. So we've got one here. It's got a deal size. It's got all these fields filled out. So let's move that to negotiation. And then we'll open it up here. And we'll see that the subtask was named the name of that parent task and then the deal size. And if we open it up, it's got the person's email and phone number in the description, and also description, which was blank. Now I didn't put a space between them in the automation when I was setting it up. That might be a good idea. And it's also got due date of February 20th, which is the same as the due date of the parent task. So all that data has mapped across. Cool. I'll show you an example of just the plain mapping a due date or start date. It's the same as what we've just seen. It's just a separate action. So on the triggering task, we can change the due date or start date, and we just have those same options of due date, start date, date created, date updated, done, or closed. The one extra is days from now. So whenever it gets triggered, it can make it say 10 days in the future. And we have little buttons here. I think you'd also go into the past. So not so valuable. You might want to say, okay, the due date was 7 days ago. So it's basically 7 days overdue. That might make more sense with the start date. Cool. Otherwise, you can select due date, start date, etc. I don't believe if you set both, it will be good. It will likely create an issue. So let's just test that so we can see. And if you have a question, it's always just great to run a quick test. So let's choose, okay, status changes to, we'll just pick one that's a bit different. Let's say pitch meetings. Okay, so we've got change to, let's go same as start date. Change the due date to the same as start date. Let's go +7 instead. I don't think this is going to work, but the team is always adding extra things and making it great. So it's possible that they've slipped in a nice little improvement there that I'm not aware of. So good to check. Okay, so what we need to have happen is we need to have a start date. Let's say the start date is today. Due date can be, let's say today as well. Okay, let's change that to pitch meeting. Give it a refresh. There you go. The team slipped in something I wasn't aware of. So what it's done is it's moved the due date to the same as the start date +7 days. So that's really, really interesting, actually. Let's have a look at that one again. So change the due date to match the start date. And then days from now is 7. and the result was, I've forgotten which task that was now, this one. So the start date was today. So it matched the start date and then added 7. So that's likely going to be really useful for a number of use cases. Awesome. Okay, let's keep moving. So that is dynamic data. I think we've pretty much covered everything that's useful there. So next up is automation limits and what to do when you hit them. So tasks can't trigger changes on other tasks. So that's what we're kind of talking about before. If this task triggers an action, triggers an automation, you cannot take an action on this task. You can create a new task somewhere, but you can't take an action on a different task. So let's have a look at that. So we've got all of our triggers here, and they're all either based on something that happens in a task or a task being created, moved to this location, something new. All of our actions, change assignees, create a task in a new location, create a subtask somewhere, apply a task to this template, add a comment, apply a template to this task, add a comment to this task, delete this task, archive this task, track this task, copy this task, track time on this task, change the tags on this task. That's all on this task. Change the time estimate, watchers, status, priority, due date, start date, all on this task. You can move this task to another list, set a custom field on it, add it to another list, or send a webhook outside of ClickUp. So they all apply to this task, with the exception of, like create a subtask or create a task, where you can choose whatever location. But the location will always be the same, no matter which task triggers it. So if you are wanting to have an action happen or a trigger happen on one task that triggers an action on another task, first of all, keep things as the same task where possible. So say you had a first task for creating something and a second task for reviewing it. Because you have it 2 tasks, you can't have automations go between them. So let's say create an ad and then review ad. Because they're 2 tasks, they can't interact with each other via automation. But what you could instead do is just have delete this one and create a status that is review. So all stays on the same task. So now instead of having 2 tasks, we have 1 task with multiple statuses, which means that when you do something on create an ad, you can apply a automation to this, which will affect the review stage as well, because it's all part of 1 task. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But if you go anything beyond that, and there's lots of cases where it's not going to make sense to keep it as 1 task, then you have to go to external automation. So using a task to trigger Zapier, and Zapier will find another task, and there's a bit of advanced mechanics behind that, and then Zapier will take the action on that task. So that's quite an advanced setup. Where possible, keep things in a single flow so that the automation can just apply the action on the same task that triggered it. Okay, also limitations on usage. So you can see here in this demo, I've taken 24 actions. So basically the way the system works is that when you take an action, so any one of these boxes gets triggered and actually runs, then it will use up an action. If it hits a condition and it does not run, then it won't take up an action. Okay, so if you are perhaps on a lower plan and you are running out of actions, I'd consider what is most important to automate. So things that facilitate workflows, kind of shape that workflow, I'd suggest what you prioritize. And then don't worry so much about the things that are just nice to have. Maybe you have an automation that saves, 1 second every time that someone has to create a certain task. Lovely to have, but if you're running out of automations, not as important. Use the ones that are structurally allowing you to run your workflow first. If you have a small number of team members, I'd probably suggest upgrading your plan, assuming you want extra automations. So say, for example, you're on unlimited, that's approximately $5 per user per month. If you only have, say, 3 users, business is just less than double that. So instead of being, $15 per month, you'll go to math, $27 per month. So it's not that much extra. and in return, you'll get 10 times as many actions, I think. I may have those numbers wrong. Whereas if you are a very big organization and you want extra automations, that $5 per person across 100 people might be $500 extra per month. It may be better to just buy one of these packages. So you get the 10,000 automations, but only at less than this. This is in Australian dollars. US will be about 100-ish. Cool. So that's automation usage limitations. Okay, next I want to jump into automation integrations. And what that means is a connection between integrations with outside softwares linking into automation. So let's have a look. We'll do it on this list. So we'll go add automation. So you can see here we've got all these categories, but down the bottom we also have integrations. And this is where we can connect it with things outside. So there's currently 4. The ClickUp team needs to build these. So we've got Bugsnag. Bugsnag is a software that if you're developing software, it will kind of automatically track and find and report bugs and collate that data. So, so there's a bunch of recipe examples here that you can look through to kind of see what kind of things are possible. So for Bugsnag, we can have things like in ClickUp, when something is moved to this location, change the error status in Bugsnag. So this is going from ClickUp to Bugsnag. So these ones are all change error status. In Bugsnag, we can have say every time an error occurs, create a task, or every time an error milestone is reached, create a task. You'll see that these are all created tasks. So it can't just take an action on a random task. It does need to just create a new task so that there's a link between the thing in Bugsnag and the thing in ClickUp. That'll become a little bit clearer as I explain the rest of these. Cool. So the Bugsnag automation can be triggered by a range of events around bugs and errors happening on Bugsnag, or matching a range of criteria, like hitting a milestone. What they'll do is they'll always create a task in ClickUp. That's the only action they link to, and they'll link that task to the error in Bugsnag. Now this has data mapping, the same as we saw before. So information that you have on Bugsnag can be added to the tasks. Okay, actions taken on ClickUp can also trigger error status changes in Bugsnag. Okay, that's the Bugsnag one. If you're not developing software, probably not important to you. Next one is Calendly. So I'm actually going to go in and create a task here. Okay, because I've got one set up. So you need to select your account. I've got one already authenticated. There's an authentication process you can go through. And so we come to this kind of similar view where we have Calendly on this side, ClickUp on this side. Now with Calendly, they only have a trigger. They don't have any actions. That's why it's on this way around. They only have one trigger, which is an event created with Calendly. So someone has booked an event. And then what we can do is we can select, there's only one action, which is create a task in ClickUp, but it does have lovely data mapping. So here we've got all sorts of fields that we have from Calendly, including the questions that we answered or that we put in the Calendly form and their responses. So perhaps we might say that the task name should be the person's first name and then space and then last name. And then we'll choose which list it goes into. Let's just chuck it in demo for now. We can apply a template if we want to. We'll just go to the basic to-do status. And in the description, we might say, question 1, ... then after it, the response, and then a gap, and then, question 2, ... and then the response. So you can start pulling in some really useful information from Calendly. There's all sorts of other things here. Time zone, name, email. Email is probably a pretty important one. Location, all the metadata that comes from Calendly. Okay, so that's an idea of what the automation integrations can look like. Okay, we'll close out of that one. Next up, we have GitHub. So GitHub has a whole stack of things. Again, probably only useful if you're using GitHub for development. So there's a range of actions on GitHub that can trigger this automation, not just one. So it can trigger any action in ClickUp if the task is linked. So you can have a task or I'm not sure what they call them in GitHub, basically a task in GitHub and a task in ClickUp, and they can be linked together. And then you can choose to do any action on the linked task. So whatever triggers it on GitHub, you can take any action on the task that's linked to that thing that triggered it, if that makes sense. Okay, if it's not linked to something, then you can only create a new task and it will automatically link them. Okay, triggers in ClickUp. Let's see if we have some down the bottom here. Here we go, up the top. So things that trigger in ClickUp. I can also create an issue in GitHub, which is their issues are their tasks, and that will also automatically link them. Again, it has data mapping. This one's a bit more complex because it does do a lot of things. I would suggest reading documentation. It's fairly well written. And to get to there, you can go to the help button, docs and FAQ, and just search for whichever feature you're looking for. So let's say GitHub automation, and it will take you to that. So there's more there than I can go over today, but that's a really great resource that I would suggest looking at. Okay, and then quickly, the last one is Twilio. Twilio is all about sending messages, particularly SMS. Okay, so when a trigger happens in ClickUp, you can send a message to someone, and that message will be specified by the phone number custom field. So something happened, it moved to this location, or the due date changes, whatever. Send a message from your number to the recipient. Now here, it's just allowing me to enter a number, so it's just a single person that it'll go to. But if I were to create this on my pipeline list where I have a phone number, then it'll allow me to send it to that phone number custom field. So trigger, action, sender is, I'll probably put manually enter my own phone number here. I have the recipient be that contact phone custom field. And the message can again have data mapping from this task. So I could say, hi, and then I think we have contact name here somewhere. Contact name, hi contact name, exclamation mark, and then blah, 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 all the other details. So that can be really great. Okay, and that is our 4 current automation integrations. Now, getting through time today, so I want to show you a few cool ideas and tricks here. The first one is chaining actions. So in automations, you can only have a maximum of 3 actions. However, if you need more than 3, you can simply have one of these actions be something that's triggerable. So let's say we'll change a custom field. We'll say payment received to yes. Then what we can do is create a second automation where we'll trigger it off that action. So we'll say, when custom field changes, field is payment received from no to yes. And we might add a condition to make sure it only triggers in the right ones. And then we can add a second 3 actions. So we'll kind of chain 2 automations together where one of the actions in the first automation triggers the second automation. Yeah. Please do not have 2 automations that run the same trigger doing similar things. It will cause problems, they'll overlap, and the automations will automatically turn off. So try and keep them really nice and clear and separate. Okay, that's chaining. Now, conditional paths. Now, if you want to say when this custom field changes, you might want to have take one action, or you might want to have it take a different action. So what we can do is we can set up 2 automations and give each one a different condition. So let's say the custom field is greater than, we use the deal size field. So if the value is greater than 30,000, we want it to take this action. Okay, and then we can set a new, finish creating this one, and then we'll create a new automation with the exact same, and actually I'll show you a thing here. Actually, no, I won't, sorry. Let's go ahead there. So we'll create a new automation with the same trigger. So payment received from nothing to yes, add condition, and now we've put in the opposite condition. So custom field, the deal size, instead of greater than, we'll say is less than. Let's go less than or equal to, just that actually if it's 30,000 exactly, we still are covering it. 30,000, and now we'll have it take a different action. We need to actually assign someone here. Let's just pick someone. Okay, so they're both set up the same way, but if the value is above 30,000, this action will happen. If it's less than 30,000, this action will happen. So we essentially have a conditional path where depending on some condition, it will take one of two actions. And you can just keep setting up as many as you want. Each time, just add a new automation and have a different condition filter. Cool. All right, a couple of tips and tricks. So I'll go into my other list here, so it's a bit of a cleaner list. So one of the great ones, and this will be really good for saving your action usage and also extending the possibilities of what can be done with automations, is this apply template action. This is fantastic. So what you can do is in any task, there's a bunch of things. So, okay, use case one, you could set several things, like you can set an assignee, a priority, a due date. Then you could save all of this into a task template. Let's just say, I think I'm going to use there, save, and let's just say test. Then the one action of applying that template will add all of those things. So you basically, so we've got the status, assignee, priority, and due date. We're setting 4 things, but only using up one action. So great for saving usage. Let's say, okay, status changes, apply template, and we'll go test. Cool. So, I mean, you normally wouldn't use a change status trigger when you've got an action that's going to change the status. So once that template gets applied, okay, it hasn't actually saved the status. We've got the assignee, the priority, and the due date there. So 3 actions taken with 1. The other thing you can do is things that don't have an action. Like say, for example, adding checklist, there is no action for that. But what you can do is if we create a checklist, and then we can save it as a task template, not a checklist template, a task template. But when we save this template, we don't need to save everything. We can only save, for example, in this case, I'm going to only save the checklists. Now, when I apply this template, it won't override anything else. It'll only add that checklist. So if I have a description in there, it won't override it. The description will stay there. It'll only add that checklist, which is fantastic because now I can create an automation where I can add a checklist. There's no add a checklist option here, but I can apply that template, and all applying that template will do is add that checklist. And I should really be more specific about what my triggers are here. Let's say when it changes to review, and we'll delete that one. Cool. Okay, so let's change this to review. And we've got a duplicate now, so it's added a second checklist. So I've had a use case before where, for each of the stages, they wanted to add a new checklist. So each time the automation would trigger based on the all checklists being complete, which is here, all checklists resolved. And then it would apply a template that adds another checklist. And then when all checklists are resolved, it applies a template that adds another checklist. And we used conditions to make sure the right checklist was added at the right times. So that's a cool use case. Also, you can do something every X time. So for example, what you might do is you do this based on when due date arrives. So when the due date arrives, takes an action, okay, action 1, but then action number 2, what you can do is set the due date. So we'll go change due date, and we'll say days from now, 7. So it's going to change the due date 7 days out. And in 7 days, it will once again trigger this, take that action, and then set the due date 7 days further out. You do need to have either the start date or the due date free, because you only have start date arrives or due date arrives. You can't do it on a date custom field. So you do need to have one of those fields free, but you can basically create this loop that happens every 7 days, or 1 day or 2 days or whatever you want. So that's a cool trick that can help out. And then a few last things is, just want to point out webhooks. So if you are using, say, an external software or Zapier, you can just send all the information from a task out to that external software. You will need some good knowledge about APIs and coding to make that work well. But if you do have that, that's a great way of linking other things in. Okay, another action I want to call out is just add comments. So here you can say any comment and you can assign it to people. You can also mention people. Oops, daisy. So maybe we'll start typing a name here. So if we have status changes to, let's say, closed. So if I change the status to closed here, and then I'll basically put that comment in for me. It'd be really great for alerting people, because this will send a notification to Amy and also me. Yeah, just a very cool functionality, good to know about. We've already covered setting custom fields, which again is a really cool functionality. Where is it? Set custom field. We don't have any on this list. Okay, that is it for tips and tricks. So then the last thing before we jump to questions is future feature sneak peeks. So I've been authorized to shout out a couple of things that are coming. So first of all, more integrations with third-party platforms. So more of these automation integrations. Second, advanced logic. So the ability to create more complex workflows. I'm not sure what that might look like, but it could be more, if then or kind of diverging path things kind of built right in. That's a guess. I'm not sure exactly. And then third one is time-based triggers. So, if X days past the due date, then do Y. So that could be really useful if like a task is overdue for 2 days, maybe it needs to be changed to urgent, or maybe someone needs to be alerted. So that'd be really, really good. Awesome. Okay, that is it for me. And now let's jump to questions. Questions. All right, so I'm going to look at the Q&A section in Zoom. So if you do have a question, chuck it in there. So Kyle asked, when we're setting multiple actions to a trigger, okay, does the order of the actions matter? For example, 1, change start date, 2, change due date, 3, apply template, different than apply, change start date, change due date. Good question. The answer is yes, it matters, but they all happen very close to simultaneously, and they can sometimes interact with each other in a negative way. So what I'd suggest is try and have all your actions be for different things. So if you're applying a template as well as changing the start and due date, don't save the start and due dates into that template. So, only one thing's changing the start date, only one thing's changing the due date, and only one thing's changing the rest of the task. Don't have 2 actions changing the same thing. It's just a recipe for trouble. Okay, Caroline said, is the only way to send an automated email string through an integration with Twilio? Automated email string. Okay, so sending an email to someone outside of ClickUp. I'm actually not super familiar with Twilio. I'm going to assume that you are. I'm not convinced that we can send an email. I believe it's all SMS. So I would say that the way to do that would be through Zapier. So you could do it triggering here and going to a webhook. or you can just set up that trigger in Zapier entirely and not use ClickUp Automations at all. Be aware that email is something that's been on ClickUp's development list for a while, so that may change in the near future. Okay, John asked, days from now is any kind of day. Can it be set to weekdays? No. I have a strong feeling that that will be only actual whole days, including weekends. Yeah, I'm reasonably certain of that. So we got change due date, days from now, 5. Let's have a look at that little tooltip here. Yeah, fairly convinced that'll be all days, and there's not currently a setting to skip weekends as a whole for ClickUp. You can hide weekends from views like timeline and calendar, but I do not believe that'll affect this. Okay, Randall asked on chat, the questions in QA are disappearing before answers are given. I'm interested in seeing them. At the top of the QA panel, there should be an answered or dismissed answered section. Yeah, okay, good point. They probably are disappearing. The person who asked them will be able to see them. What you can do is shoot us an email after this webinar and just ask us for the list of questions, and we can send that out to you. Okay, a little bit of chatter in chat. If you do have any more questions, we're on for another 4 minutes, so do chuck them in the Q&A. Someone had mentioned how great dark mode was. Yes, I agree. So dark mode, if you go into your, I call this the profile button down here. Dark mode is a little toggle here, and it looks rather good. Also, what you can do is in the layout, there's this dark sidebar, which is just like a partial dark mode, if you like that as well. Cool. Well, I hope that was really helpful. If you have any more questions, chuck them in. Otherwise, we'll bring this webinar to a close. Okay, question from Anonymous. Can we have higher contrast for text? There are a couple of options there. So in layout, size, and style, you got different layouts and sizes, but there is an option for high contrast. I believe it's in your personal settings, high contrast mode. So try turning that off, turning that on, and see if it helps. It'll just change some of the background colors, some of the grays and such, to make things a little bit more easily visible. Okay, Jamie asked, can one assignment being set to done update the status of another? No. No. With subtasks, there's a little bit of functionality there. So for example, you had a task and then you had a subtask. You can set an automation so that when all subtasks are complete, the parent task will also be marked as complete. But in terms of one task, one parent task affecting another parent task, no, that hits into the limitation where you can't affect a second task with a trigger from the first task. But I'll show you this one. So all subtasks resolved, change status to complete. Cool. So when I complete the subtask, what we'll see is that parent task will be completed as well. Yep, there we go, complete. Awesome. Okay, automation quantities are on a per workspace basis. Yes, correct. So that counter here, that's across your entire workspace. Yep. Okay. Kaz, you have a question there about changing the type of the task. That's probably more of a future feature question. I probably can't answer that one. But I do regularly do it in setups. I don't. So you're kind of thinking like a hard-coded, like this is a task, this is a person. But you can, the way I currently do it is just with a drop-down. I add a drop-down called type. This can be task, that can be a meeting, and that can be a call, that can be a person. Now you do probably want to be separating these into different lists, but this is really great because if you have these set, you can then pull in some great reports at like the everything level or on dashboards. So you're excluding, everything except for task or everything except for a person, whatever works. Yes, you can report on how many calls are made, exactly how many emails sent. How many emails sent, perhaps too granular. Like you can do it, but I'd suggest that that's too much work. But yeah, cool. Glad that was helpful. Will automations consider adding checklists in the future? I think everything's up for grabs, frankly. Largely the way that ClickUp works is they pay attention to feedback and then they add features based on feedback kind of as fast as they can. There's obviously a huge number of suggestions, but yeah, if you would like to have a simpler way of adding checklists with automation instead of using templates, definitely do just chuck it in at feedback.clickup.com. Can some task prevent the parent from being complete? There is a ClickUp called incomplete warning that does that. Incomplete, where are we? Here we go. Now, thing to note with incomplete warning is that it will give you a warning. It will not forcibly stop you. So you can basically override it. ClickUp in general is not a command and control style software. So if I go complete here, did I have it on for this space? That's a question. So I had it on in general, but I didn't actually look at the particular spaces. I do not have it off for this space. Okay, so we go complete and go, are you sure about this? You have two unresolved items. One of them is a subtask, one of them is a signed comment. So I can hit resolve all items, it'll automatically close them. I can continue without resolving them, or I can stop and actually complete them. Okay, can you use automation to create a reminder for a deadline? Okay, so the reminder functionality in the inbox, one thing to note there is you can have those be recurring. So that might just solve your problem. If you do want to use automation to do it, what I would do is an automation when due date arrives, here due date arrives, here add a comment and just tag the people in that you need to have notified. Yep. Okay. Do we get a warning if an automation has failed? That's a very good question. I believe an email is sent. I can't verify that though. I haven't had an automation fail in a while. Good question. I would suggest sending that one through to the support team just to absolutely confirm that. I don't want to give you the wrong answer. Okay. When you have a task open and try to change the task from there, it only goes down to the next task in the list, causing you to have to change the task multiple times to skip steps. Okay, Cynthia, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying, but I'm going to take a guess. So I think what you're saying is if you click this arrow button, it'll only go to the next status in the list, and you kind of want to skip someone. What you can do is instead of clicking the right side of the button, click on the left, and then it opens the drop down, and you can just pick whichever status you want and go straight there. I think that's what you're asking. Okay. And then someone asked about compiling suggestions and feedback from the Q&A and into the feedback request list. Good idea. It depends on how much the time the CS team has. I won't speak for them, but always, if you do have a really good idea, I would suggest adding it to the feedback boards yourself. The benefit of that is that if or when it gets the status changed, like it's marked in progress or pending review, you'll get a notification of that. If the CS team does it for you, you will not. Okay, Cynthia, that answered my question. Fantastic, glad. All right, that's it for our automation. Our webinar for today. Thank you for attending. If you do want to contact me for any other things, that's my site there. Otherwise, I hope that was really, really helpful. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.